In this lesson, we're going to take a look at doing some user password management. Now, traditionally on Unix systems, we store the person's encrypted password in the etc password file along with their user account details. So down here at the bottom is my user account on this machine, and we can see that the second field of etc password, which is traditionally where we store the encrypted password, has an X. The X tells me that this machine is configured to use shadowed passwords. So instead of storing them here in etc password, they're really stored over in etc shadow. Alright, so notice there's a corresponding line for my same user account. And then this second field that's colon delimited is my encrypted string of a password. Right, this machine has been set up to use SHA-512 encrypted passwords. But we could also see SHA-256 or MD5 some passwords as well. And the way that we read this is the dollar signs are delimiters. So the first segment of this password is the encryption algorithm. A 6 relates to the SHA-512 algorithm. A 5 would be SHA-256. A 1 would be an MD5 encrypted password. The next field between the dollar signs is the encryption salt. So when somebody provides me a password attempt for this user, we use our SHA-512 algorithm along with this encryption salt to encrypt the password they've provided me to verify it against the password we have stored in the file. And the last bit of the password is the encrypted password that has been set. So when someone provides a login attempt, we take whatever password they provided on the login prompt, we'll encrypt it according to the algorithm in this field, we'll take their guess and encrypt it with that algorithm using the salt, and what had come out the other end had better be this encrypted password. If not, then we know that they have not provided an accurate password. Right, now all the password algorithms that are commonly used, MD5, SHA-256, and SHA-512, are hashing algorithms, which means if we just have this and the salt, we can't necessarily convert it back to its original plaintext value. But what we could do is a brute force of trying a whole bunch of guesses with the encryption salt and the algorithm to see if it encrypts to the right value. Alright, we use asymmetrical encryption, typically, for storing passwords. Alright, but if we look at the rest of my user accounts line here in etc shadow, there's more stuff, namely, all this stuff. Alright, so these additional fields correspond to some password control information, as well as some other bits about my account. So for example, this field is the number of days that have lapsed since January 1st, 1970, that the last time this password was changed. So when we look at dates in etc shadow, typically they're stored as a number of days elapsed since the Unix epoch, or January 1st, 1970. Now we could use date to convert this into a human-friendly time. And it turns out that a tool that we're going to see in just a little bit does exactly that. All right, we have a tool that we use for interacting with the etc shadow fields that makes our lives a little bit easier. We don't have to count the number of days that have lapsed since January 1st, 1970. All right, but this is the date of the last password change. All right, after that, we get the minimum number of days between password changes. So if I were to change my password today, I'd have to wait 0 days before I can change it again. So this is a way that you could force someone to keep their password for a certain amount of time before you permit them to change it again. The next field is the maximum number of days for a password. This is how we determine password expiration. So what we do is we take the last date of password change, and we add to it this many days, and the resulting day is when the password will expire. Right, the default is basically unlimited. Right, there is an actual finite amount of time, but it's so far in the future that we won't actually reach it. All right, so if your facility has a policy where you have to expire passwords every 90 days or something like that, this is the field that you'd want to change to make sure that that happens. 7 days before the password is about to expire, when the user logs in, we'll start warning them that their password is about to expire. So the next field is the number of days in advance of password expiration that the user should start being warned that their password is going to expire. And then we have 3 blank fields. All right, the first blank field between these 2 colons is the inactive days. Think of it as a grace period. It's a period of time where the password has expired, but can still be used to authenticate to the machine. But when somebody is authenticating during that time frame, instead of being logged in and presented some kind of warning or something else that their password is expired, instead, if you're encroaching on this inactive days period, you're required when you log in to immediately change your password. The machine logs you back out, and you have to log back in with your new password. Alright, so we'll see a little bit more on this when we talk about our utility that we use for interacting with this file contents. Alright, the second blank field after warn days is the account expiration date. So on this date, the account will become locked and the user can no longer log into the machine, regardless of the state of their password. So even if their password is still valid, on this expiration day, we will stop them from logging in. And then the third and final field is after the trailing colon. And currently this is not used for anything. It's a reserved field that we might choose to use at some point in the future, but is not currently used for anything. Alright, if you couldn't remember all that, if we take a look at the man page in section 5 for Shadow, section 5 is the configuration files section of the man pages. It goes through and gives us an item by item field. So the first is login name, then the encrypted password, date of last password change, minimum number of days before you're allowed to change your password again, maximum number of days, warning days, inactive days, and so on and so forth. Alright, now at the bottom of this this man page, there's also in the see also section this command called change. And that's where we're going to spend some more time talking about manipulating the contents of Etsy Shadow. Alright, so change, if you don't call it correctly, will print out a syntax diagram. And so, for example, maybe I'm interested in showing the account aging information for my account. So if I do a change-L on my user account, it goes in and looks at those additional fields of Etsy Shadow to present a more human-friendly group of information about this user. For example, the last password change. So in a file that's stored as a date of the number of days that have lapsed since January 1st, 1970. But we can see here, change has gone ahead and calculated that back to the actual human-friendly day. Right, and then it tells me things like the minimum days, the maximum days, and the warn days. And then there's a whole bunch of fields about account and password expiration, which is currently set to never. Alright, but maybe my facility requires that we have to change our passwords every 90 days. So according to the change usage diagram here, to set the max days, the maximum number of days I can keep a password before changing it, -M or -- max days. So I can do a change -M90 on my user account. Right, if we take a look at the Etsy Shadow line, right, this field used to be 99999, and now we've changed it to be 90. All right, and if we do a change-L, notice that now my user account has a password expiration. All right, so it takes the last date of password change plus the max days and then calculates that into when this password should expire. All right, if I want to give a grace period, so remember during this password inactive time, what happens is when a user logs in while encroaching on this time period, they're forced to immediately change their password, logged out of the machine, and then required to log back in with their new password. Currently, the password inactive days is set to never, which means when my password expires, That's it. I'm locked out of the system until a system administrator adjusts my password for me. So I could do something like add a 2-day grace period. So again, looking at the change syntax diagram, minus capital I sets the inactive time. Right, what it does is it converted our blank field here, which said that there was no inactive days, to now say that there are 2 inactive days. And if I do a change-L on the account, so my password expires on November 25th, but it becomes inactive and unusable on November 27th. And if I log in on the 26th or 27th, what will happen is I'll be forced to change my password, logged out of the machine, and I can log back in with my new password. All right, the last thing we might want to change is the account expiration date. So maybe I know that I should only have temporary access to this machine. 6 months of access. So if my account was created here, August 27th, 6 months from then, let's call it February 27th. So I can use change -E to set the expiration date. And you might have to look at the change man page to figure out the syntax for this, but it's basically the 4-digit year, month, oops, that'd be 2013, and day of month. Alright, so on February 27th, 2013, my account will expire. It won't matter what the state of the password is, this account will become locked and unusable at this date. All the files and everything else associated with the account will stay in place, but this user can no longer log in. And again, if we look at the last line of shadow, which is where my account is, what it's done is calculated in the number of days that have lapsed since January 1970, what that date should be. So change allows me to provide a human-friendly format of date, or at least a more human-friendly format of date, and it will take care of calculating that into the days that have lapsed since January 1st, 1970 for storing in the Etsy shadow file.